Seek above all for a game worth playing.
Oh baby, it's witchcraft contagious. I felt it for ages. We're out of these cages in this house of mages. It's witchcraft, it's dangerous. Beware of these pages. There's spells of all flavors in this house of mages. In this house of mages. In this house of mages.
Hello and welcome to this episode of Make Yoga Magic Again, the House of Mages podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Arulian Cumming. Today I am joined by Sara Stone once again. So, hey Sarah.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming back. So, if you haven't listened to the first episode I did with Sara, that was about 3 years ago or something. Yeah, and we've been meaning to catch up for a second one. And yeah, it just kind of aligned now. So there's a few topics that we want to touch on. But yeah, if you just want to share maybe what's been happening for you, because there's been a lot happening for you since we chatted a few years ago. So.
Yeah, so much has changed. Gosh, it's wild how much can change in a year or 3 years.
Yeah.
So yeah, I gave birth to my first child about 6 months ago now, six and a bit months ago.
Congratulations.
Thank you. So yeah, it feels like a lot has changed. I was actually thinking about that on the drive over here. I was like, wow, like I feel like such a different person to the last person that you interviewed a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
But yeah, still on the Sunshine Coast, just slowly getting back into work now after some time off in maternity phase. But yeah, lots has changed with like my work and where I'm focusing. So excited to share some of that on the podcast today.
Yeah, cool. So we originally kind of planned this to get together to chat a bit about enlightenment in the bedroom, which I definitely want to get into as well, which you're really like starting to bring more of a presence of on the Sunshine Coast, which I'm really excited about. But before we get into that, like the topic that I really like to start with is the idea around motherhood, because I was mentioning to you before the podcast that conversation has come up recently for me with a couple of women that I've chatted to, in them saying that, yeah, they didn't feel there was enough of a presence of people talking about the connection between sexuality and motherhood and how that changes as you become a mother. And so, yeah, we thought like as you becoming a recent mother and, you know, being so connected to the sacred sexuality industry and your own practices, how that may have shifted both your personal practices and focus, and then maybe, like you said, you kind of gone through a rebirth in your whole business model as well. So yeah, I'd love to chat to you, just like all the things about how that shifted for you over the last year or so, and whatever you want to share.
Yeah, great. Yeah, this is definitely like the conversations I want to be having. Obviously, you know, becoming a mother, like I really want to, you know, show up and support mothers, because it's such a big shift on all levels, like, you know, but definitely on a sexual level when you become a mother. Gosh, I don't even know where to start, really. When you were speaking that, like what also popped into my mind was just like birth, and how just birth can really be, you know, it's a huge like portal for healing and transformation, and you're literally like birthing another human. And through that, through my journey, and I hear that this is quite common for women, there can be really like a deep healing of all of those like maiden wounds. And for me especially, there was like a lot of wounding around my sexuality.
Yeah.
And so it's no surprise that I ended up, you know, working in sacred sexuality. And I look back on that journey, I'm like giggle a little bit, you know. I definitely think that when I first got into you know, this working in this industry, and that, you know, that interest sparked from my own pain points around sexuality.
Yeah.
And it's been, a big journey for me. Like, and I guess one thing that I've been like reflecting on recently is just that journey of like really healing my sexuality, and how that is like that there's going to be so much more of a potent transmission from this other side of transformation. But yeah, I think when I first got into the industry, and my maiden was like, she very much used sex as a way to get my needs met, you know, and to feel valued and to feel loved. And I see that so clearly now. And I mean, sure, you know, that doesn't just transform like that through birth. However, when I was actually in labor and birthing my son, there was like, I went through this full journey, which it feels special for me to share it here, because I actually haven't shared this even publicly yet. I've been writing my birth story and planning on doing a podcast around it, but I won't fully go into it because it's a full podcast on its own.
Save the good stuff for your own thing,
but yeah, like through that journey, I had, I went on like a full healing journey of healing my, you know, sexual trauma and my sexual wounding. And I think this is common, you know, like even on from more of a trauma perspective and you know, looking at more somatics, it's like when you're birthing a baby, it's like coming out of your sex center, right? And it's like, that's, you know, it's almost like de-armoring you, right? So there's like, it's pressing on all of those like little niggly bits within your body, within your fascia, your whole body's opening, and in that process there can be like a lot of trauma released, a lot of like stuck emotions and things. But yeah, and so I went through this big journey of like feeling stuck at one point in my labor, and it wasn't it wasn't flowing. And I was like, you know, I was like, oh, what's going on? And I was literally on my knees just like praying to God. I was like, I will do whatever you need, like help me, tell me what I need to do and what I need to feel and all the things, like this is intense, like I just want to meet my baby now. And I was like, I'm feeling all of that pain that I didn't feel from my maiden, right, that I'd suppressed. And then I ended up transferring to hospital, which I won't go into, but long story short, ended up in hospital and had to face all these fears around like being abused, because I chose to have a home birth because I wanted to avoid birthing within the medical system because of all the stories that I heard about, you know, birthing trauma and all of that. And but really what I realized is like it was like the part of me that didn't feel like it could have boundaries, or that someone would respect my boundaries and hear my no, that like really made that choice of being like, no, I want to do this like autonomously, and I'm going to birth at home. And then fast forward right to the end, once I've given birth to my son, I ended up having to go into surgery and get stitched up because I had a 3rd-degree tear. And like the end of my birth journey was like me laying on a bed with my legs in stirrups with like about 4 or 5 men around me looking at my vagina stitching me up, and I was like, whoa, this feels like I've like come full circle here. It was really deeply healing, like as well, you know, you could look at that and go, fuck, that sounds traumatic, but to me it was like, oh, it felt like the finishing of a cycle.
Well, thank you for sharing that. You're welcome. So did it obviously took a little while to like, I guess, integrate and like digest all of those things that happened in such a small amount of time. So what has been your process for like, since that has all happened, to kind of like land and to like slow down and start digesting and integrating all of those things? Like,
it is. I feel like, you know, processing your birth for some women, especially women that like, you know, haven't done a lot of work and they don't have a lot of I guess conscious awareness about the journey and things like that, I think it can take like years and years and years for them to really digest and process birth, because it is such a huge journey. I feel like within a couple of days I got a lot of like awareness of like what happened, but of course it took a little bit longer. I still think it's happening. Like as I started writing my birth story maybe 2 months ago, and I write a little bit at a time when I feel the aliveness too. But even writing it, I'm like, God, I'm feeling like I'm getting to more and more layers of this. But I mean, I guess how does that translate into my like transformation around my sexuality and coming into motherhood? I feel like before birth, let's rewind, even before I got pregnant, when I met my partner, I feel like I started going through like a really deep transformation with the way that I relate with my sexuality. I felt like I was I'd been single for a couple of years and really exploring my sexuality, and I had a lot of fun doing that. And I was like, finally, before I met my partner, and I was finally at a stage where I was sort of like conscious of things, and I was like, I had the frameworks and the of communication to like really communicate my needs and my desires, and like, I was like going through this journey of like really like being authentic and relating. And then, when I met my partner, I got quite sick. I had like adrenal fatigue, and I got Ross River, and I was quite sick. And
I remember that.
Yeah, it was a journey. Yeah. And it was like, I felt like, I was like, I realized how much of my identity had been like really focused around being like hyper independent and like that boss babe, and I really like that part of my personality. But through that journey, I was really forced to, and actually before I met him, I'd already sort of been on a journey of like really embracing my softness and like more of that maiden energy. And I think it was maybe about 4 or 5 years ago now, I did a breathwork journey, and it was like a shamanic breathwork sort of group thing, and I went really deep, and I went the experience took me back into like a trauma on one of my first sexual experiences where it was non-consensual, and I went into like a freeze response. And so like I really sort of like relived that, and I was like, God, I'd really like pushed this down and like really didn't want to, like it wasn't even like in my conscious memory. So that's how like deeply it was buried. And I think once that had popped up, that took me on this journey of like really owning my sensitivities, my softness, all of these parts of me that felt really vulnerable. Like, and I felt like I'd sort of in those early years of my sexuality when all of that sort of trauma happened, which is so normal, I think, because there isn't the awareness and the communication, the conversation, and the education for young women coming into their sexuality around like consent and all these things. And I'd like squashed a lot of like that real sweet sort of maiden energy of mine. And was like, I guess took on more of this like masculine or like hyper independent, like overachieving sort of energy. And then once I started like uncovering all of those layers and sort of owning that the softer parts of me, I met my partner, and that like triggered a lot of stuff, and I felt like from then I've been on this real journey of like I guess you sort of have to, on any healing journey, it's sort of like you have to like the pendulum sort of has to swing to the other side. So I feel like I went from being like very sexually available, because that's like that was a bit of a trauma response of like that's how I got my needs met, to like swinging and feeling like I was quite sexually closed and guarded, and like just had a lot of boundaries and a challenge sort of opening my sex, and just I needed a lot of safety to open. And I guess that's because also like obviously that natural swing, but then I met my partner, and I was like forming a relationship with him, and I guess there was like this foundation of safety being created, so I felt like I could say no, and I felt like I could like allow myself to really listen to my body and honor those layers and things. So
what do you think created that kind of safety? Like, I know it's obviously just like a general mix of different things, but you know how sometimes that happens naturally, but what if someone's in a relationship where they want, like, they see a lot of potential in like so many good aspects of the relationship, but there may not be that language or that kind of communication there? Like, did it just happen naturally, or did you have to like work with a lot of tools and sort of thing? Because obviously with all your experience you could bring that into the relationship. So
well, it definitely didn't happen naturally. It's still an ongoing process. And I think that it's a journey. It's really a journey of like finding what you need and learning the language to communicate that. And especially when it comes to sex, like it's still such a taboo topic. There's still so many couples that I work with and couples that I speak to about sex, and I notice that there's actually not a lot of even openness in their like in their communication about sex. So if there's just not a lot of people talking about sex, talking about what they want, talking about what they need. And I think also culturally, you know, like for thousands of years, it was like women just lie down and they just shut up, and you know what I mean? Like, I think women, that is so ingrained in us too. Like, and do
you think that's like leading towards like the hyper independence and stuff as well, as far as like you know, that pendulum swing, which is like a really positive thing, but like for you, like trying to refine that balance, like was there like a key turning point in that you noticed like some effects of like that hyper like independence? And you know, that could be the case for men as well, like, you know, it can be any gender that can do this pendulum swinging. But what was like the signpost for you being like, actually this is too far over some end of the spectrum, or like you know, where maybe it wasn't working for you personally, and what you started to do to try to rebalance that?
Yeah, I think, I mean, like, I'm so here for, like, you know, feminism and all of the good aspects of that, where, like, yes, I want equal rights, and I think, you know, women should have a voice and all of that thing. Like, I'm so here for that, but I think a lot of it is a bit of a trauma response from, like, those thousands of years that we haven't been heard.
Yeah.
And it's, like, shaming men and shaming the masculine and the patriarchal and all of that. And so I'd say, if it, like, it's, like, where's it coming from? Is it coming from fear? Is it coming from needing to protect yourself? And for me, like, I guess, like, the realizing that it's, like, too far is, like, realizing that I was sort of, like, cock-blocking myself, right? It's, like, being in that energy. Cool, it's great. I feel like I get shit done, and I'm, like, you know, I'm succeeding in life, and, like, I'm feeling like I'm lacking connection and like the true desire to, like, my true desire to, like, unite with a man and have a family and all of that. Like, I was blocking that because I was afraid. Yeah.
And it happens with men as well. Like, so many times I've seen where, you know, you meet these guys that are really just like wanting one night stands, and like, and the way they talk about it and all that sort of stuff, but then you dig deeper and actually get to know them, and they've been hurt. Like, pretty much all of them have been hurt, and so they put this guard up, and it's just easier for them because then they're the ones kind of in control. But then, like, when you dive even deeper, like when you have moments, they're not happy at all. And like, they actually are craving something, but they're worried that the moment that they actually drop their guard, that they're going to get hurt again. And so it's really like, it's a very similar thing that's happening. Like,
totally.
So it's really interesting.
I love that you speak about that. And like, I'm so passionate about this. I've been studying, like, doing my own study and research and things around, like, attachment for a long time. But this year especially, I've been in, like, maternity leave, I've also been, like, studying, and I've been doing a certificate of somatic attachment therapy.
Okay, yeah.
So I've been diving deeper into, you know, attachment styles and looking at, like, developmental trauma and how that affects our relationships, and, like, how we can heal on a somatic, on a body level. It's so common. I think it's like what you just said. It's really common. I mean, men or women can be more avoidant or more, like, anxiously attached. And I think that the woman that is hyper independent and like I just explained, is sort of like cock blocking herself, is often sort of moving more into that avoidance strategy, right? But for me personally, I was in that because actually when I pulled down that, like, mask, I was actually very insecure, and I was like, I was more anxious, right? And so I was like, oh, I'm just going to be in this, like, masculine, I'm going to do my thing, you know, this feels good, because, like, when I'm not in this, I actually get hurt, like you said. Like, I attach to men really quickly. I'm like, you know, I make stories of things, and like, I'm super insecure. Like, beneath that I don't really, like, love the person who I am. Right? No, I see that definitely. And that's what I was actually going to say as well. That I notice sometimes that like, that avoidance is basically to overcompensate for that natural, like, anxious kind of attachment. But I think as well, like, you can't run from it forever, because, like, eventually you're either going to be numb and kind of unhappy, which is like I've been in that as well. Like, I've been hurt, like, early in relationships, and kind of develop without even realizing this kind of avoidant style, and then realizing that, like, after all these experiences, I was just never, like, happy, and almost, like, getting to this level of depression where I was, like, numb and, like, couldn't understand. But then when I finally let everything in,
like if anyone's watched Vampire Diaries, like did you ever watch that show?
Nah, I've never
Like
watched it.
they're able to switch off their humanity and not feel anything, but when they switch it back on, everything floods in. It's like opening up the floodgates, and I feel like that's what happens sometimes. And then like you kind of need to find it, like it needs to happen eventually. It's either going to happen. That's like when I say with yoga, like people either come and like support their body to like as a preventative measure, or they'll just like push their body too far and then end up hurting themselves. So it's a similar thing. Like you're going to end up coming to this kind of work eventually anyway. Like hopefully, yeah. I mean, maybe not the way you expect. Like you're going to have to deal with the stuff that this is around. Like this is just, I think that's the thing as well, is like this is just tools to help us approach day-to-day life stuff.
Yeah.
You know, this is stuff that is relevant to everyone. I mean, like, except if you're going to be up in the mountains and talking to nobody. But even, like, self-talk, right? You could spend, like, 2 years by yourself, and you're probably going to end up having those same patterns of how you talk to others as how you talk to yourself. Yeah. So even if you were to say, oh, well, I'm not going to talk to anyone for the next 2 years, it'd still be, like, helping your self-talk, I guess. So it's just super relevant.
Totally. Is it alright if I speak to something else as well?
Oh yeah, 100%,
so
yeah.
So at Enlightenment in the Bedroom, which we'll speak about after, it's an event that I'm relaunching here on the Sunshine Coast, which is an educational event. It's at the end of the month, and I'm going to be speaking about this. I'm going to be speaking about how secure attachment and coming out of these like anxious and avoidant strategies, and finding security in the way that we connect and openness is really like the doorway to sexual fulfillment. And so what I want to speak about as well is like the different sort of like touch a little bit on the different styles of attachment, like we just spoke about anxious and insecure and secure, and then how that sort of drives the way that we interact sexually. So for someone that tends to be have more avoidant strategies, I don't like to look at them as styles and labels. It's like we all have, like I feel like, and you know, maybe someone might have more insecure or preoccupied strategies, but I feel like that same person may also have different avoidance strategies with different people and different situations. So I look at them more as like safe, like strategies to create safety, really. But yeah, someone that's more, we'll still look at it as a spectrum. That someone that's more on the avoidance side of the spectrum will have more disconnected and sort of avoidant sex, where, and you see this a lot with men, especially where, you know, they have a lot of one night stands, as you were just sort of speaking about, a lot of disconnected sex. They're like really closed emotionally, just not available. The sex tends to be really goal orientated, and it's very focused on like pleasure and wanting to feel sensation and also release stress. Like it's just a release, sort of, rather than a way to connect with someone. And then someone who's more preoccupied or anxious tends to be more on, as I just explained, like sort of like using sex as a way to connect and get their needs met and feel valued and feel loved. And so what happens often, and so I work a lot with couples, my focus is now more working on couples, and I tend to attract a lot of couples who are not having a lot of sex, and generally what's happened is the woman has been more in that side, so she's been more like very sexually available, open to sex to a lot of people, to feel needed and loved and valued and all of that stuff. And then they get into a relationship and stuff happens, and then they just fully close down, so that pendulum swings and they're just fully not sexually available at all. And so and often they're polarizing and attracting men who have been more in that avoidant side and more using sex as a way just to like get off, and feel pleasure, and that very much goal orientated. And so yes, it's going to take time to find like more of that secure way to have sex, which is really about being emotionally responsive and open to your partner, and using sex as like letting go of it being about orgasm and about just having a release, you know, and more about unity and coming together and creating connection. And so, this is what I'm supporting a lot of couples with at the moment. Well, one couple, but this is going to be my focus moving forward. I think with women, where it comes to creating safety, it is a process, it is a journey, and I feel like just like any sort of healing journey, right? Like you get to one stage and you're like, cool, I've figured that out. It's all done. And then like it's, you know, it's a cyclic journey, you know, and then you get to a deeper layer and you're like, oh, okay, like I need to create a different level of safety for this. But yeah, I think when you're going on this journey of creating safety, it is about like having these frameworks of communication. But also when it comes to sex, sometimes you can have all the tools and all the ways to communicate, but it's still not going to land for the other person because, you know, like we all just really want to feel like we're sexually desired, you know, and rejection can be like a very sensitive point, you know, especially sexually. So it's more than just learning the frameworks. It's also about healing, you know, our relationship to the other person. So it's about looking at the parts of us who the parts of us who you know, are resentful towards our partner. And so when I look at resent, it's like all of the unsaid things, all of the unmet needs, all of the things that we've just sort of swept under the rug and be like, oh, that doesn't really matter, but actually really does sort of like affect you, you know?
Yeah. And just to, like to expand what you said about rejection, even changing like the framing about what rejection is, because like a lot of the time we just have this umbrella term is like, if I don't get it exactly the way that I expected or want it, then that's absolute like just rejection. Whereas like sometimes it's like, oh, like I really like this, but maybe we could just adjust the heading a little bit, like adjust the rudder just a little bit, a few degrees, you know what I mean? Whereas like, and it's like how to approach that as well, because some people take offense so quickly that if like, you know, we're in a flow or in momentum and suddenly it's like, oh, like you get pulled up, it's just like immediately stop and then that's it. Like the journey is over kind of thing during a session or something like that. Whereas like it's trying to how to pivot, being like, oh cool, let's just shift directions a little bit and then shift back rather than just like, yeah,
I hear you. And it's a delicate process when it comes to sexuality, because there is a lot of wounds, and there is like, especially like men have been really focused on, you know, like technique and getting it right, and not a lot of women have spoke up in the past and be like, hey, actually that doesn't feel good, or, you know, I don't feel safe. So when someone does, like I know for me, like with my partner, I've been like, oh, actually I need this, and he's like, God, like you have a lot of needs, like I've never had this, you know, like I've never really had it's never felt this challenging with other people. I'm like, well, to be honest, it's probably because they're not speaking up. You know, they're just too afraid to tell you how they really feel or what they need. So maybe that's the thing, it may not have been challenging before, but they weren't actually achieving as high a score as they thought they were, kind of thing. Totally.
So I guess it's like where the bar is and all that sort of stuff. But that's like, but it's also like anything that is out of the norm is challenging initially, but that's the thing, it's like realizing that the first time, like if you encounter one of these like hurdles or bumps, it's only the first few times that are going to be the worst, because it's like the sudden change of pace. But once you get that becomes easy again, and then you can like level up and start evolving and shifting and changing these things, and finding the flow again. But totally. I think it's just it interrupts the flow, and when it comes to like sexuality as well, like that can be a big thing, like even sacrificing, like in my own experience, you know, sacrificing having like a good session to break that up, possibly have, you know, kill the vibe for that moment, but to increase the ability to have better future sessions. Because sometimes, like, you know, it is good to do it. I'd like to get your point of view as well of when to bring this up, because like it is good to bring it up outside of it, but when you're in it, like it can be the perfect time as well, but also the worst possible time at the same time.
Well, what I think is quite common is like, so women especially, like we open differently sexually to men, and we really like our arousal sort of comes from like the outside in, whereas like men sort of comes from like the cock out. As like what I mean by the outside in is like we don't just get like I'm not going to say we as in all women, but like it's not super common for a woman to get a desire and then that turns into arousal, and then it's like cool, then orgasm and ejaculation. Like it's not a linear process, you know, like that. And there's a lot of women aren't walking around and just getting spontaneous desire. Often our arousal comes from, it's like a response to something, and often a response to being feeling safe and feeling like emotionally met and held and safe from a partner. And often what happens if, like, let's just say, you know, sex is on the table or whatever, and perhaps, you know, a woman can feel like there's something off energetically, or you know, something's been said, or something from their days, like, still in her system, and she's just like a little bit closed, and she'll want to have a conversation before they have sex. And often a man's like, fuck, why do we have to have a conversation now? Like, we're just about to have sex. And it's like, that's a woman's way of feeling safe.
Yeah,
you know, and
okay.
especially when they talk, like, you know, that's why women need other women. We vent and we talk because it actually creates oxytocin for us. It's like a release for our system.
Yeah.
So, I know that this specific thing that I just spoke about, that's definitely happened with me and my partner before. And he's like, now we've had this conversation and you've brought these things up, like, he's feeling a bit closed because it's maybe triggered a wound for him or an insecurity for him, and he's just like, why do we have to have this conversation now? Can't we have this conversation another time, not before we're about to have sex? And I'm like, yeah, but this is my way of creating safety, right? So I think it can be a bad time for one person, but a sort of like a need for another person. Does that make sense?
And it's interesting, like, because I'd love to talk a bit about this, because this is something that I've been working on, because I have a tendency, and probably like a lot of men, like, to problem solve, and so I have a tendency that I'm still working on. It's been years that I've been working on, but I still notice it, if I'm not aware of it, that, you know, if you were to bring something up, whether it's before sex or just any time, I'm expecting, you know, I'm constantly on, like, edge, because I'm like, what do I need to do? And I think as well, it's interesting that we think of that as, like, the masculine trait to act, but it's almost like, to resolve that, we need to let go and surrender and kind of, and not actually be ready to act, and just to receive, because nothing actually needs to happen. Yeah, exactly. And that's something that I've noticed. I look back at some of my relationships, and I see certain situations where I was like, this makes that situation that, like, actually really frustrated me because I didn't know what she wanted in that space. I look back at it now, it's like, no, she was actually just wanting to share this thing that was on her mind just so she could let it go. And all I needed to do was just listen and, like, maybe ask some questions around it, and to make sure that she knew that I absorbed the information, and then I kind of followed up on that, like, and kind of supported that. But I was always like, okay, cool, what do I do? Like, what do you want me to do? Or what do you want to do? Or what is next? And totally. And it wasn't this, like, even I think about how my body was in that moment, it was like leaning forward, it was contracted, whereas if I think about, I don't know if you've ever done this, where, like, I go back to situations and memories, and I try to sit in my body as I was then, and try to, like, instead of, like, leaning forward and scrunching up and being contracted, try to lean back in that situation, and it feels completely different. And I can almost, like, see, like, a chain of events that if I'd acted that way, you know, then it would have been a different outcome of that situation. And so I'm trying to take those, because obviously you can't change the past, but I'm trying to take those into my future endeavors and things like that. Totally. Yeah, so what's your perspective when you're needing to share those certain things? Like, is that what you, like, want most of the time, or all of the time, or what do you generally experience in that?
Yeah, I think the scenario you just explained is super common with men and women. Like, men are like, okay, solution focused, because, like, they're just so wired to provide, you know, and to help, and, like, that actually feels really good for them. And it's so frustrating for women in that situation, because I just want to be fucking heard. Like, when you're trying to, like, find a solution, like, for me, it makes me feel like there's something wrong, or I'm broken, or, you know. So yeah, I think really men really need to learn how to just validate a woman and just hold her. Like, that's what we're needing. We're just needing validation. Like, oh yeah, so what I'm hearing is, like, XYZ. Is that right? And they're like, yeah, and it really hurt, and blah, 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 blah. And you're like, oh yeah, I can see how that would feel uncomfortable. Like, oh, that wasn't my intention, but is there anything you need from me? So that's one way that, instead of providing a solution or assuming that they need something from us, just asking, how can I support you with that? Yeah. You know?
I like that, though, that direct asking, because even as you're saying it, I can feel my body still having a lot of resistance to doing nothing. I feel like I just, like, I feel this, like, actual, like, energy moving through my body. It's like, but I need to do something.
Yeah.
Like, I can't just, so...
And there's probably something you can do. Like, if you said, how could I support you? I think most of the time the woman might just be like, well, actually, I just feel so supported just communicating that. And I feel really seen and heard, and I feel really safe, and I can feel my whole body soften, you know?
Yeah.
Or they might be like, oh, can we co-regulate a bit? Can we just go and have a cuddle or a spoon in bed for a moment, you know? That might feel really supportive. Like, so these are actually just some... It's great that we come here in the conversation, because this is like even just a great little, I guess, framework of communicating to create safety.
Yeah, and I think just having these conversations, like in general, but especially men and women, and I've like mentioned this a few times in previous podcasts with other people, but I think that's what, since we did kind of segue into enlightenment in the bedroom, maybe we can chat about what it actually is, because I think like, you know, people get a vague idea, but they might not understand what it actually is. But also as well that for people who may be wanting to expand and haven't got anyone in their friendship group, because I feel like we live in a little bit of a bubble. Yeah. Like a lot of our friends and stuff like have these kind of conversations, but it's not as common as we might think just because we're around it a lot. And so other people who are wanting to learn and to meet people and have these conversations, how they can come in and what to expect in the event. Totally.
Well. And that's actually why I'm sort of like taking the focus of my business away from sort of like the sacred and like away from like focusing on like the spiritual community, because, you know, it's actually the people that are not in that community that need the help.
Yeah.
Yeah. And when I'm like talking about alchemy and all of these things, it's not landing for most people. They're like, what the fuck is alchemy? You know?
Yeah.
They're like, just give me some practical solutions. So yeah, I love that. And that's what actually I love about Enlightenment in the Bedroom, which is it's a sort of a luxe educational event around sex, sexual wellness, intimacy, relationships. It's a multi-speaker event, meaning we have, like, I host the event and I generally speak at the event as well, but then I also have 2 guest speakers that are experts in this field, you know, which range from sex coaches to sexologists to, you know, relationship experts and coaches and therapists, and yeah, they're just coming and sharing on different topics. Sometimes there's sort of like a theme to the event, and other times there still generally is like a bit of a connection between what we're all speaking to. But yeah, I always have a man come and speak as well, because I think it's really important for men to hear from men. Yeah. You know, because there's a lot of women doing the work, and it's not as common for men to show up, especially in these spaces of sexuality and intimacy.
I'm curious as well, like the ratio, because like, I mean, pretty much most of my guests on the podcast who have been like talking about this sort of stuff have been women, and a lot of the people that I know and kind of follow and have learned from have been women, and I find it hard to find men. So I don't know if it's just the geographical location, because what do you think about?
I think it's just cultural. I think it's just like, you know, women, it's just culturally, women, it's normal for women to I don't know, I guess women aren't as suppressed. Like, you know, we grow up with, like, in the past, men have grown up as little boys and told, like, men don't do this, they don't cry, they don't show emotion. Like, and I think, I don't know, I think men are just a bit slower to come to the party, you know?
And I think a lot of guys kind of have this resistance in that if they admit that they're going to learn from another man, they're like belittling themselves, and they kind of have this egoic thing. It's like, oh no, I don't need help. Whereas like women, I find like don't get that as much. They're like, oh, you have something to teach me? Cool. Like, like I want to learn. Let's like teach me. Whereas like guys kind of, and almost like the guys who are, it's like you can't really win. So I've had like guys, for example, and I do this as well, like I judge people very quickly depending on their, you know, Instagram and stuff like that, and it's hard not to, because you have to kind of show up in this very flashy, over the top way, otherwise you kind of don't get noticed. I mean, I've had people say this about my branding and stuff like that as well, but like, so guys would be like very serious or very like hyper masculine, right? And they'll be like, oh, that guy's just a try-hard, like he's just, you know, trying to act too tough. But then you find the other end of like guys who are like very gentle and very coming across, and, you know, they'll be like, oh, that guy's a pussy, why would I want to learn like sexuality and masculinity from him? It's like, well, what do you actually want then? Like, what guy, like, it's like trying to find the balance between, and then you find that really they don't want to learn, like they just want to and again, like, it's not all men. Like, I've got some beautiful men in my life who are not like this at all, but I do find even my friendship groups are primarily women most of the time because they're just so much more open to going to events and doing things, whereas I try to get my guy friends to come to events sometimes and they're like, no, I don't want to learn from these, but I don't need to learn that and all that sort of stuff. So
I think like you nailed it when you said, like, I think it's a bit easier to bruise a man's ego, than a woman's. But I also think when I look at like men and women in our culture, like women are way more connected, like it's normal for women to, and we need connection. It's normal for women to have a lot of platonic intimacy with other women, whereas it's not so much for men. And I remember even growing up, like my dad didn't have a lot of friends. My mum had heaps of friends. We had a lot of family friends, so we were always quite social. But I don't remember my dad having a lot of one-on-one friends. And if he did, it was like friends with other workmates or something. So I don't know. I think men are just more autonomous, I guess, and women are more like naturally wanting connection and seeking sort of intimacy. And I think that there is like this belief that you can only sort of have one, like, and it is true. Like you have to sort of like let go of a bit of autonomy for connection. It's like I sort of look at it as like, the reins of a horse, and like one side is like autonomy and one side is connection, and it's sort of like if you want more connection, you sort of just have to like let the rein of autonomy go a little bit. Anyway.
And I feel like as a man, like sometimes what works for me, and I've noticed other men, is having a practical benefit from doing a certain thing. It's like, not just doing the thing to do the thing. It's like, what am I going to benefit? Like, what is my takeaway? They're like, what kind of little show bag am I going to get to take away from this event or this thing? And that, like, I noticed, like, I'm leaning away from that as time goes on, just for the experience, because I know there's always value in an experience, no matter what it is. But I notice, like, especially past me, wanted, like, okay, but what am I going to get from this? What am I, like, what skill set am I going to, like, where am I going to level up to get from this?
And that just, like, closes you off from so much more other experiences that you could have as well. But when it comes to sexuality, what I really want to speak about is just where I feel like that conversation is leading my desire to speak about is like the men are so much more shamed, like sexually, like because women have been sexually repressed. It's quite empowering for a woman to like come into this space and like reclaim her sexuality and all of that stuff. But in that process, we also have like very much shamed men, and I think men actually have a lot of sexual shame. They have a lot of shame around masturbating. They have a shame, because they have been like societally shamed around looking at women. And, I was talking to my partner the other day and he was saying how like he's a surfer, and he was saying like, when he's paddling out, like he'll purposely like paddle out like the longer way, so he's not paddling past a woman with like a G-string bikini just because he doesn't want to be looked at as like a dirty old man, and it's like there's so many little things like that, and I think it's really uncomfortable for men to come into spaces like that are quite sexually positive, because there's still a lot of shame, and there's still a lot of like shaming men and blaming men for the past.
100%. And thank you for bringing that up. Like that's something that I've been working on as well, because as a male yoga teacher, I was very, very careful about that, because I'd heard a lot of stories like about male yoga teachers kind of taking advantage because it's primarily female dominated industry, and you just hear all these horror stories. So I kind of like went over the other side of the spectrum and tried to like desexualize myself as much as possible as a teacher. But I kind of got a funny awakening when I was in Bali. I was running a retreat there, and I met this old German lady. I feel like she was in her 70s or 80s. I don't know how old she was. Way more fit than me. She was just an epic lady, and she owned her own retreat property in Germany. So I'd seen her around the thing. Anyway, I chatted to her a few times. On the last day when I was leaving, I went in and said goodbye to her. I gave her a hug goodbye. And like when I went to hug her, she like stopped me and kind of held me by the shoulder. She's like, hug me like a real man, like, and pulled my hips like towards her and everything, and straightened my body up. And she's like, you're sticking your butt out behind you. She's like, hug me properly. Wow. Like, hug me like you mean it. And it was just, it jolted me. And I started to notice that whenever I hugged like a woman that I didn't know very well, or like especially if it was like around my work, I would like stick my butt out the opposite direction, because I didn't want to like bring my hips too close, because for me that was like a sexual kind of response. And so I didn't realize that I was pendulum swinging so much that like I was just doing like this duck butt kind of weird hug thing, and and I feel like that even that can be like, and that's how things happen, right? We overcompensate.
Exactly.
And that's how all these pendulum swings have started to happen, that we try to avoid, and it just becomes an inch and then an inch, and eventually like duck butt, you know what I mean?
Eventually duck butt.
Yeah. So,
and it's funny because like, I think culturally, like if a man is holding back like that, or if let's just say he's like overcompensating through like being a people pleaser or a nice guy and all of that, like a woman can't trust that. Like a woman can't trust a man that's not willing to just like fucking claim his desires and be in that penetrative energy. But like culturally it's so shamed, and women are still shaming it because they still haven't actually healed with that energy as well. And truthfully, like I've got a lot, like I think a part of my journey of like sexual healing has been around like I guess cleaning up my own like leaky sexual energy, but also learning how to feel safe around men and set boundaries, because I guess I have experienced sexual assault before. I did have a wound around like that sort of like masculine sexual energy being directed at me. Like I was very sensitive to that. I see that there's so much work that still needs to happen in this space around women healing with that energy, learning how to just like say no and have like learning about consent, learning like about what their body needs, and doing that sort of like deep sort of trauma healing around that, and men doing the same, and also men like cleaning up, like it's like we all have sexual desire, right? And like pretending we don't have it, or walking the other way on the beach, or paddling the long way out, like it's like avoiding the fucking situation. It's like avoiding the elephant in the room, right? Yeah, exactly. So it's not really helping the situation that we're currently in. Definitely. And that's the thing, just bringing it to light and having a bit of a sense of humor about it, and like everything like just kind of builds up, and it's like that rubber band that just like so much tension and then springs out. And you see that a lot in when we find something, because that's the thing, everything that we do ends up stemming from something authentic. Like it's obviously like there's a genuine real issue that starts these pendulum swings, but it's like we end up taking it like so seriously that people get sick of it. And you see this in like a lot of the industries, like for example, talking about the attachment styles, and in like how trauma informed is, like all these terms that start because they're actually so important and they're neglected, and then they become so important that they become like the basis of a lot of new trends, and then people get sick of it and then they discredit them entirely. So I'm seeing like some people like there was like no trauma informed spaces, so people were just running crazy containers and all this terrible stuff happening. And so like the real issue is like, no, people need to be more informed about this sort of stuff because people are having bad experiences. And so then that was like that the trend was getting more and more on that end of the spectrum, to the point where we've gone too far and we can't do anything anymore because like something is going to happen and someone's going to be triggered. So the real issue is like genuinely bad things can happen, but we have to put in things in place to try our best that it's not going to happen. But also human consciousness and human bodies are like the ultimate variable. And so you can never be fully prepared. And so when people are just being like, you know what, we've gone too far, let's just get rid of it all, it's like that's just going to send a pendulum swing on the other side. So like like what's your perspective on all that, and like how can we like try to stop the pendulum swinging to extravs? Well, I think that will never stop the pendulum swing. That's a part of being human, it's like exactly. There's polarity and duality, and that's the sort of world we live in. But I think that people just need to take responsibility for their own healing. Because because I had that experience quite young of being sexually assaulted, through my whole life, I have been a victim to men groping me. Like every trip that I've been on overseas, I've had some other sexual assault, because I had because that was my wound, right? Like I had that work I needed to do on that. So it's like it's me taking responsibility for that. It's just like, yes, I have been a victim, but I'm also not just going to blame men and stay in that victim state. Like, I get to take responsibility. I get to look at my relationship with my sexuality. And yeah, it was leaky as fuck, because when I say leaky as fuck, just some context around that. As in, like, I'm looking at sexuality as like an energy, not just like, and so when people say they've got leaky sexual energy, it's like they've got a lot of like repression, or they're using their sex to get their needs met, as I spoke that I have. So you can feel that there's like this unspoken desire, and you can almost, like, I say to some women, like, have you ever been at the shops or whatever, and someone's walked past you, and you may not even look at them, but it's like you can feel that they're looking at you before you even turn around and see them. It's like you can feel that energy of them, like, sort of hooking into you and checking you out, or like, for me it feels horrible. Like, I just like, my whole body just like collapses, and I just fully close my energetic field. So but yeah, I had to take responsibility, because I also had, like, my sexuality wasn't like fully healed, and I had leaky sexual energy as well. So of course I was going to be a victim to that too. Yeah. So yeah, I think it's really about, yes, we can, like, I think it's super important if you work in like sacred sexuality, or if you're running events where sexual that are sex positive, that are, it's open to explore sexual energy together, or even just explore intimacy, even if it's platonic. Like, I think it's really important to have an understanding, or anyone working as a coach or a therapist, they really should have that, be trauma informed and have that awareness. However, just because we have that awareness doesn't mean that no one's going to have a traumatic experience, or an experience that can, not necessarily traumatic, but that doesn't feel good. Yeah. And that's not like, you can't.
And sometimes, like, that's unfortunately, like, and I'm not discrediting anyone's experiences, but like, sometimes I know that the only way that I'm fully able to heal something, or to work through it, or to change my responses, is to actually feel it fully. And so it's trying to find that balance between, like, putting yourself in, like, I feel like, even temples and all these different things, even though they're fun, they're like training grounds for your psyche. And to, like, so you're basically like putting yourself onto the battlefield in like a controlled situation, and that's what yoga is as well. Like, people think you just come to yoga to, do the poses and breathe the breath and do all these things, but you're actually trying to recreate scenarios in where your body, your like different layers of self and mind and emotions are challenged, to see how you respond, and to try to see what your natural way of response is, and to just pivot that natural like flow of like water. I kind of see it as like, your natural responses are like water flowing through rivers that you've created over time. It's like just trying to adjust the direction a little bit, and sometimes these containers are like exactly what you need to, because if you don't meet that, like, nothing's ever going to change. How do you know? Like, it's like the testing ground to see if what you've been doing up until that point has actually changed anything. Because if you have the same response and act in the same way, then nothing has changed. Then all your work, like literally all the work you've been doing up to that point, has done nothing if you can't at least have a slightly different, like a quarter of a degree of slight like pivot, if that makes sense. But yeah, it's not just saying that like to just throw everyone into the fire to just like see what happens and be like, it's your responsibility to just like, deal with it. It's trying to, but that's the art form, right? Yeah. We're trying to create these experiences or playgrounds kind of thing to experience these things. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, 100% for sure. And especially like when it comes to, sexuality and like intimate relating, it's like there's a lot of fucking triggers, right? Because like that's the point of it. Like our sexual relationships are the greatest like portal for healing and evolution, because they're just such a mirror for us. They're like that, they're there to help us to evolve, because it like through relating with a partner intimately, like they reflect all of our unowned stuff. So it is a big journey of healing that, and especially because sex has been quite taboo, and it's been like squashed and shamed in our society, and there's a lot of mixed messages about there. Like, you know, there's essentially, we're told that it's like really shameful to speak about it. Even there's so much shame still blanketed over everything sexual over our body, but then it's also used as a way to sell and manipulate, and so there's so much confusion in this area. And I don't think anyone really gets out of having, you know, like, unless you're like I guess conceived and like grew up in a really conscious household and environment where it was very sex positive, and like no one gets away from having some sort of like wounding around intimate relating. So but I think this is why events like Enlightenment in the Bedroom are important, because they're not like a temple or a workshop where you have to come and, you know, all your wounds are going to come up and you have to interact with other people or do practices or share things. Like, they're just, it's an educational event where you go, there's dinner, there's wine, and you just sit and listen, you know, and you can pop your hand up and ask a question if you like, you know, there's a chance for you to share and ask something specific around you, but you don't have to either. It's sort of like just dipping a toe in, being like
a low intensity kind of event. Because the thing, I almost see like all these events are connected, but like it's like I see this like kind of sliding scale of intensity. It's like some of the temples, it's like all your stuff will come up and you could heal very quickly, but you could also re-traumatize yourself very quickly. Whereas like something like this, it's like a slow burn. But it's also, and I think also more of the social aspect as well, that I imagine these are so much more. You just like get to connect with other people, and it probably is an opportunity to connect with other people that are on the same kind of like part of their journey as well. That you get to chat with.
And I think also it doesn't matter where you're at the journey. Everyone needs this work, you know. Like, for me, I know that I've had a lot of like imposter syndrome and like, you know, stuff come up for me because throughout my journey of like healing, you know, my sexuality, and you know, through having a baby and like being in a relationship, like shit comes up, like, and I have my own coach. I need support. I'm in my own containers, and I'm still on my learning journey. And I don't think that ever just comes to a point where I'm like, I am fully healed, and you know, I've learned everything I need to. Like, I'm still on the journey, right? And I'm supporting people based on like my knowledge and wisdom that from where I've been. You know, and I talk to other people that work in this industry, and they still have blind spots around themselves in relationship with others, you know.
It's like what you were talking about earlier about you know, you were saying that like women need like lots, it's not a linear pathway to being like open, right? And I feel like because if you're not watching the video, like we're using a lot of like hand gestures and body language. That's why I like the in-person stuff as well. But I kind of viewed it as this like circle, right? So a lot of people think it's like this linear journey where it's like, okay, you do this and this and this and this. So if you don't know this, you've skipped a step. But like it's just this huge like globe of different approaches, and we're all kind of trying to get to the same area. But like you said, there's gaps and blind spots, and there's just so much. Like, you can never know it all.
No.
And it's like just finding what works for you as well. And sometimes someone can have that extra little piece that can just be like, like I finally get that other thing that I've been trying to do because I see it in a new perspective.
Totally. And it's like, I think that this journey is a really important journey to go on if you're single as well, and if you're wanting to, you know, if you're wanting to call in like more of a conscious relationship, and you're ready for that more long-term relationship that's like actually healthy, because maybe the past ones haven't been so healthy. You know, I think that this is, you know, obviously we need to do a lot of work on ourselves to be able to even attract the type of partner that we like, but also like you can't fully heal on your own, because the last pieces always need to be in relationship to another. And you know, I really want to also normalize like couples therapy and getting like support from a coach or a therapist or someone when you're in a relationship, because it doesn't matter, even if you're in a like secure, healthy relationship, there's still shit that's going to come up. You're still going to have periods where you feel disconnected, you know. It's really, really normal to have a baby, and I think, I can't remember what the stats are now, but it's very high for couples, like in the first couple of years they have a child, to feel a lot more disconnected, you know. And if you don't work on that within the first couple of years, like if you get to 5 and you're still like if your child gets to 5 years old and you haven't reconnected, right? Like it's going to be very hard to come back together, you know, and come into intimacy and connection and have, you know, have a great sex life again if you leave it for that long. Like, so it's really important to do the work when you're in a relationship together as well. And there's something really potent about that, like doing the work together.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
Because I'm really interested as well that, like, as you've gone through this journey of becoming a mother, like how you've kind of experienced it, and you probably had that bird's eye view of it as well because of all the things you've done. Like, I don't know if you've seen that TED Talk called Stroke of Insight, and she's a neurologist or a neuroscientist, and she has a stroke, but she talks about it like as she's having it, she's like terrified because she's having a stroke, but at the same time she's like, this is what she studies, and she's like, oh my god, this is so interesting, I'm experiencing this from the inside out. And so she's like also taking notes, and so obviously she survived, and it's prompted a lot of her research now, but I imagine like it's a similar thing where like you're experiencing like the shift from pregnant, like first trimester, second trimester into full pregnancy, having becoming mother after the last 6 months and everything, but also like being like, oh, this is interesting, and like shifting. Like, I'd love to, we're coming to the tail end of the podcast, but if you just want to just share like how your sexuality has changed through the pregnancy and now coming into motherhood, and what you're doing to, like you said, ensure that you reconnect before you kind of, because it's so easy, time goes so quickly, it's so easy to put something off to the side and be like, I'll deal with it later, and then like you said, 5 years later, and it's like, oh wow, where'd all the time go? And now we've ingrained these habits too.
Totally. And it goes so quick. I think everyone's journey is different, you know, like for me, I had like a lower sex drive in my pregnancy, and especially when you get to the end, like you know, when you're massive, you're like, this is even hard to have sex, you know. Like, you're like, how do we do this? And actually I remember thinking about this, like being like, you're so much more vulnerable when you're growing a human. Like, women are just vulnerable anyway. You know, like when speaking about this, like needing to create safety, they've done research on like men and women when they're opening up to have sex with their partner or whoever. It's like women, their body, like their amygdala like switches on, so they're naturally like, their survival responses is naturally like sort of just there waiting, like looking for their environment, is it safe to open, because it's like, it's so much more vulnerable for a woman, like we're being penetrated, our body is being entered when we have sex, you know, than a man. So and even more so when you're growing a baby. Like it's when you have a baby inside of you, you're so much more vulnerable. Like just even on like a primate animal level, right?
Yeah,
like,
I can imagine.
Yeah, and when you have a little baby as well on the outside. But I remember laying on the bed being pregnant and being naked and making love with my partner, and I remember laying there being like, far out, I feel so exposed. Like at one point I was like, I feel really vulnerable, and like I think that was a part of I guess just the whole natural thing of like not, just having this baby in front of you and feeling like you need to sort of like cover it or protect it. And then also I think what's really normal for a woman is to go through a big change in the way that they like view their body and they feel in their body, because you generally put on a lot of weight, and generally for a lot of women it's hard to lose that weight, like it's stubborn to come off. And then also after you have a baby, like your body's healing, and then often you're breastfeeding, which takes up a lot of energy, and you don't have the time and you don't have the energy to exercise or to lose the weight like you would. So I think for me it's been a big journey of like learning to really like love and accept my body, and for women, when we don't feel sexy, it's hard to have a sex drive when we don't feel sexually desirable, so there's been that. And then a lot of women actually have a higher sex drive when they're pregnant, and then when they have the baby and after that they lose their sex drive. So I think it's different. For me, it was like I lost my sex drive in my pregnancy at different points, but after I had my boy, I haven't had a big issue with libido. I think it's still, again, like this process of feeling like comfortable and sexy in my body. I think that there's like many ways that we can have intimacy, and sex isn't just about like I think that the main reason we desire sex is to feel connected and to feel desired. I think that's like a primal need for people. And there's many ways we can do that. Like, I think for me, even in that postpartum period where I couldn't have sex, as my body was healing, like I still had a lot of cuddles with my partner. I don't know, for me, actually, I felt more connected to my partner since we've had a baby. You know, seeing him as a dad, like, it's just so beautiful. And I think also for us, it's actually helped us to even come into a deeper layer of secure attachment, which has helped me to feel more safe to open sexually. But it's not always the case with women, and I know a lot of women, a lot of friends that have babies, they're still, you know, like 6 months down the track and they're like, I still have like no libido. And yeah, that's common. And I think that's something that you have to work on. Like for me, even though I have libido, I still don't feel as connected to my sexuality and my sensuality because I'm just constant, and I don't have the time like I used to in my maidenhood, like to constantly be doing practices all day, you know. But for me, I'm really like committed to at least doing 5 to 10 minutes of dance, of moving my hips, of breathing, some sort of practice to connect me to my like sensual nature. And I guess that changes form and stuff as well, because I've noticed that, like, I've had a conversation with these women recently, how they've kind of clued on that. I think they said that they were trying to reclaim the maiden essentially, but realizing that it's changed forever and they need like a new kind of format to have it. They can definitely take pieces back, but they're trying to default back to the old way that isn't there anymore. Like, they've actually transformed. But I also notice this in my own experiences just in life, that whether it's the way I relate, the way I do work or anything, if I've really transcended an old part of me, an old version of me, I can never do the stuff the same way as I did before. It's just interesting, like, what you were talking. Obviously, I don't have any kind of embodied experience of this and never will. But it's just interesting, like, and that's why as well, like, having these conversations, just hearing your experiences, like, I can relate these to different parts of my life and stuff as well, because everything's interconnected. Like, the way that we relate is like, it connects to everything. So I think having a child definitely brings like a whole nother layer of complex issues to a relationship. There's so much more things that can come up, you know, and there's a lack of time or not as much time to process things, to be in process, you know. And that's one thing that I've noticed is like, there's so much through this journey of becoming a mother. There's been so much that I need to feel and transmute, and I don't like have the time and the space and the energy to do that like I did before children. So and when I'm not doing it and there's a lot in my body and I'm not finding the time to connect with my partner and speak about all of these things that are coming up for me, then that can just create a wedge between us as well. But this is something that I want to bring more events and stuff to the coast. Like I do work online with people and I will continue to do that, but right now I'm feeling really inspired to create more events. I love the in-person stuff, and after that big time through COVID where we couldn't meet in person, like, I'm feeling quite inspired to bring more stuff to my community. So I am in the process of creating a couples workshop around intimacy, which will probably be sometime in August. So
cool.
So if anyone's listening to this and is like, that's me, I want to reconnect with my partner, reconnect with my body, then get in touch. And you can follow me on Instagram. It's like the.Sara without a h.stone. And just follow me there. And I want to bring more workshops and stuff as well for mothers to reconnect to their body and reconnect to their sexuality.
Cool. Is there going to be any of that? Because what are you sharing, if you want to give a little sneak peek of what you're going to be talking about at the upcoming Enlightenment in the Bedroom?
Do
you know yet?
I'm going to be speaking about like how secure attachment is the doorway to sexual fulfillment. And so essentially, in essence, I'll be talking a little bit like I just did about the different goals of sex, or the different sort of styles of sex based on our sort of attachment wounding. And then how we can come into secure attachment, basically how we can create emotional connection, receptivity together, so that we can create the foundation of safety so that we can have an amazing sex life. And just talk about how, how we're taught that, you know, when we first get together, there's this big honeymoon period and we have a lot of sex, and we're taught that desire like naturally dies in a relationship. But I think it's the opposite. I think especially if you're doing the work and you're meeting all of the pieces, that actually sex can be this thing that just gets better and better. And it's like the more emotionally connected we are, the better the sex. Yeah. And the better the sex, the more emotionally connected we feel as well. So yeah, that's what I want to speak about.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, well, all of Sarah's details are in the show notes below, as well as information of how to get in contact with her, as well as Enlightenment in the Bedroom. So when's the next Enlightenment in the Bedroom?
So the 24th of June.
24th of June.
Yeah, it's a Saturday night.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, awesome. Well, is there any last little pieces that you wanted to share before we wrap it up?
No, I think that's all. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, cool. No, there was so much, so much gold in that. So yeah, thank you for coming.
Yeah, I haven't done any podcasting or anything for a long time.
Well, I feel like so much just like poured out of you as soon as you got talking. You're like, you could tell there was like so much you've been wanting to share.
Totally.
And it's like you've been like journeying for so long, so now it's like finally get to like all the stuff pours out. So no, It was awesome.
It's like someone give me a mic, let me talk.
Yeah, that was perfect. Yeah, so thank you so
great.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to and being a part of this episode of Make Yoga Magic Again, the House of Mages podcast. I've been your host, Daniel Aurelian Cumming. Links are all also in the show notes as per usual. Thank you again. I'll speak to you soon. Until then, make yoga magic again.